Thank you, Bernard. It's nice to be on your stage, and so nice of you all to come tonight. It's a great thrill to be here, and a great thrill to read with my friend Jim, be spending this evening with him. We didn't want to have a long, elaborate introduction tonight for either of us, not because we think we don't need one. The last time I was on this stage, I was on with my friend Sam Shepard, and he had Philip Seymour Hoffman introducing him. We didn't have that. I had a guy that I went to high school with who does dinner theater down in Shreveport, but that wasn't enough. I'm going to depart from usual, I suppose, and read a part of a story. In January, I started writing a Frank Bascom story, and I thought I would just read a part of it, just to see if I can. And thank you for bearing with me. It's called Falling Forward. Odd new bouquets ride the twitchy wintry weather this early December morning near the shore. Flowery wreaths on an ominous sea stir expectancy in the unwary. It is the bouquet of large-scale home improvement, fresh-cut lumber, fresh white PVC, the lice sniff of sackcrete, prickly sealants, tar paper, denatured spirits, a softened sack of roofing nails, the starched aroma of Tyvek. I notice it first at the red light at Hooper Avenue, then again when I climb out at the Hess to gas up before heading over the Bridge of Sighs. So many sighs from Toms River to Seacliff. Gusty breeze flitters my hair, sets the silver whirligigs to spinning at the reopened Bed Bath & Beyond in the Ocean County Mall. Only new bedding can keep us down. Across the acres of parking lot, only a tenth full at 10 a.m., the Home Depot, Kremlin-like, unavailing, but enigmatically your friend 2 weeks now before Christmas. They've thrown the doors open wide and early. Customers trail out, balancing boxes of new toilet works, new motherboards, new wiring harnesses, shrink-wrapped hinge assemblies, hollow core doors, an entire prefab front porch teetered on a giant shopping cart on its way to providing modest entry to some still-standing domicile, blottoed by the hurricane. 6 weeks past now, and lost in time, but not in memory. Everyone stunned here, quarrelsome, put upon, funked, but still resolute about coming back. The bouquet, a whiff of fresh-cut boarding mingling with the Swedish gas station scents where I'm standing, my dollars spooling along merrily like a slot machine in the gathering December clouds, plus the ocean's sulfurous weft and the bay's familiar landward stink. It is the full-on air of disaster. To my nose, once practiced in these things, nothing smells of ruin as fragrantly as the first attempts at rescue. Out here under the windswept Hess awning, someone has been ingenious enough to pipe loud sports talk radio blabber to us patient gas pumpers. Someone, it is Mike, says, "This is a fusillade of F-bombs, I'm telling you, a real 30 seconds over Tokyo if you get my reference." Mike is speaking animatedly to Pat. It is the Pat and Mike show from Magic 107 in Trenton. I was once among their faithful. They are old now, too. "Just listen to this," Mike says. "I'm in total disbelief, frankly. This was on ESPN." Another huskier, gravelly, exhausted voice takes up. "Let me just tell you so-called sports writers one F-bomb thing. Okay, you F-bombs. When you can F-bomb coach an F-bomb 9-year-old F-bomb grammar school team, then I might give you one piece of F-bomb respect. But until then, you F-bombs, okay? You can double F-bomb yourself from here to F-bomb Sunday dinner." That about says it all, doesn't it? Pat broadcasts to us customers under the Hess awning. silently at our tasks. Says it all and then some, Mike agrees. Wow, just leave your keys on your F-bomb desk and take the F-bomb bus back to Chillicothe, quotes Benzawick. Un-F-bomb believable, Pat says. Unbelievable, you got that right. Let's pause for a break, you F-bomb. Me, you're the F-bomb. Ha, 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 ha. In recent months, I've begun compiling my personal lexicon of words that should no longer be usable either in speech or any written form. This in the belief that life is a matter of constant subtraction, aiming us toward a solider, more nearly perfect essence, after which all mentation goes. We pick up the trib and head off to our own virtual Chillicothe's. A well-groomed stockpile of fewer, better words could help with all that by, if nothing else, setting an example for clearer thinking. It's a bit like moving to Prague, but not learning the language, so that the English you hopelessly end up speaking to make yourself understood bears a special responsibility to be clear, distinct, and value-bearing. When you get old, you pretty much live in the overaccumulations of your life anyway, by which time not that much is happening, except on the medical front. Better to strip down, and where better and easier than the words we choose to express our increasingly precious, increasingly vagrant thoughts. It would be hard, for instance, for a Czech speaker to appreciate the word poop or the phrase, we're pregnant, or what's the takeaway? Or for that matter, awesome when it only means tolerable, or preemie, or mentee, or no problem when what you really mean is you're welcome. If I were ever to be asked to give a public lecture on this subject, believe me, I could. Likewise, friggin', soft landing, sibs, bond, closure, hydrate when it only means drink, make art, share, reach out, noise used as a verb, and, apropos of Magic 107, F-bomb. To me, fuck is still a perfectly serviceable word, noun, verb, or adjective with many clear and distinctive colorations to its already rich meaning. Its use certainly shouldn't win anybody a bus ticket back to Ohio in the unemployment line. Language imitates the public riot, the poet said, and that's today's life. I'm also on the list. And what is today's life, if not a riot? We're all invited to improve things on the planet, even if there's little hope for us in the long run. Yesterday morning, just past 9, I received an unexpected call. My wife, Sally Caldwell, actually answered but got me out of bed where I had lain awake in the blear, overcast morning shadows, daydreaming about the possibility that somewhere, somehow, something good was going on in the world that could affect me positively, even make me happy, only I didn't know about it yet, but might not be crazy to anticipate its sudden announcement. Since I got out of the real estate business after 20 years, anticipation is the chief thing I miss, though it's the only thing, given how matters have gone and all that's happened to me. I'm quite content again in Haddam, enjoying the next level of life, possibly the last, the clean desk demographic in which I or anyone is free to do unabated, unalloyed good in the world, among others, no matter what it might be. I have not yet perfectly found it at age 67, despite a God's own cavalcade of solid, forward-looking causes crying out for our attention. I do travel up to Newark Liberty with a veterans group once a week to greet the weary, puzzled, returning troopers on their home cycle in from Afghanistan and Iraq. I don't credit this as being a genuine commitment or a true giving back, also on the list, since it's hardly an inconvenience to stand smiling, hand outstretched, shouting, "Welcome home, thank you for your service." Truthfully, it's more a show-offy bit of grandstanding meant to demonstrate we're all still involved and relevant, only in our half-meant fashion, guaranteed to prove we're not. In any case, my personal censors are on the lookout for more I can do with my end-of-days time, known otherwise as retirement. Frank, it's Arnie Urquhart, a man's nasal voice, apparently Arnie Urquhart's, says, though it's a voice throttled by automotive frying pan cell phone noises and sounds stressed and hectic in my ear, plus from somewhere There's background music. Peter, Paul, and Mary singing Lemon Tree from faraway 1965. Lemon tree, very pretty, and the lemon flower is sweet. My mind, where I was standing in my pajamas, staring out the mullioned front window as the Elizabethtown water meter reader sauntered up the front walk to check our consumption, my mind flees evocatively back to the ultra-sensual Mary, cruel-mouthed, earthy, pressed blonde hair slashing, an alto voice promise of no-nonsense coitus you'd renounce all dignity to have a chance at, knowing full well you couldn't stand up to it for a minute. A far cry from how she ended life, years on, moo-mooed and unrecognizable. And which one of the other two was the weenie waver? I try to remember. Peter or Paul? One moved to Maine. What was left for them? But the fruit of the poor lemon is impossible to eat. Turn something down, Arnie, I said through the noise clutter of wherever Arnie was on the planet. Or close something, I can't hear you. Oh yeah, sorry, a slurping wind noise of window glass being powered closed. Poor Mary goes silent as the stone she's buried under. The connection was suddenly clear, then went silent for a long moment while I waited. I don't talk to people on the phone that much anymore. Why do weathermen all wish for a sunny day? Arnie said distractedly out in his car silence, wherever he was, as if he'd been stumped by something for a minute. He put me on speakerphone and seemed to be talking out of the distant past. It's their DNA, I say. Yep, Arnie said, and smiled a great rattling sigh. Cars were audibly whizzing past wherever he was. He'd pulled over. New Jersey is a both-hands-on state, and means it. Where are you, Arnie? I said. I'm on the goddamn Garden State by Cheesequake. I'm heading down to Seacliff, or whatever the fuck that's left of it. I see, I said. How's your house? Do you see, Frank? Well, I'm glad you fucking see, Arnie said from Cheesequake. Back in the banana days of the realty bubble, I sold Arnie Urquhart not just a house, but my house in Seacliff, a great glass and redwood architect-designed beach palace flush to what seemed then like the benign and glimmering sea. A dream house I saw to it Arnie coughed up a pretty penny for, 2.1, no vig on the private sale. I was moving inland again, taking down my shingle, cashing out, having gone underground, having undergone physical vicissitudes and feeling the need to step away, my time being up. This was 7 years ago this fall, 2 weeks before Christmas, like now. In my defense, I put in several calls to Arnie's house in Hopatcong to find out how he and his house had weathered the storm. I was certain he had the good sense not to be in it when Sandy arrived. In fact, I called several old clients, including my old realty partner, and the news was all bad, bad, bad. In Haddam, Sally and I lost 4 oak trees, one already dead, half the roof of her potting shed, and a cracked windshield on my car. That was it. A big nothing, my mother used to say, before making a farting noise with her lips and laughing out loud. I called you probably 3 times, Arnie, I said, and felt the curdling, discomforting, almost giddy sensation of being a liar, which I'm not. The Elizabethtown meter reader gave me the all-clear thumbs up as he headed back to his truck at the curb. He'd approved of our water usage for November. No problem. That's like calling the corpse to say you're sorry he's dead, Arnie said, disembodied on the speakerphone pipeline. Couldn't quite hear you. What were you going to suggest, Frank? Take me to lunch, buy your house back, service after the sale? There's no fucking house left down there, you jackass. I didn't have an answer for Arnie. A patent gesture of kindness, commiseration, fellow feeling, shared sorrow, empathy, all weak sisters in the face of true loss. I only wanted to know the worst hadn't befallen him, which I saw now it hadn't, since here he was. Or even better, that his house, my house, had possibly missed the worst of it, dodged a bullet, caught a break, or that I knew there was no hope. Seacliff was where the big blow came ashore, like Ike's troops in Dunkirk. So Why had I called? These acts are never well defined. Still, it didn't make me culpable. I don't blame you, Frank. Don't worry about that. That's not why I'm on the blower here. Arnie Urquhart is an ancient Wolverine, like me, class of '68, hockey, Rhodes finalist, Lambda Chi, Navy Cross. We all talked like that in those troubled, breezy days. The blower, the crapper, the Z-machine, the Libes, Boogies, Gooks, Hogans. It's a wonder any of us were allowed to hold down a paying job. Arnie owns and runs, or did, a carriage trade seafood boutique up in Cranberry, and has made $1.5 million off shad roe, Iranian caviar, and imported Black Sea delicacies the feds don't know about, all delivered to Goldman Sachs and Schlumberger high rollers for their exclusive old boy on teams held behind walls guarded by cameras and vicious dogs and that no one hears about, including President Obama, who wouldn't be invited anyway because, in the high roller Republicans' view, chitlins and hog maws wouldn't be on the menu. How can I help, Arnie? I said. I'm available. Clausewitz said the plan was the first thing out the window once the battle begins. I hoped this wouldn't be a battle with Arnie, though clients' first target when a home sale for any reason goes south is inevitably the realtor, whose intentions are almost always good. In this, however, I had no plan. I just answered the phone. I'm on my way down there, Frank. Some piece of shit called me up at home, wants to buy the house and lot, the whole thing, whatever's left, 200 grand. I need some advice. You got any? I'm not using mine, Arnie, I said, to lighten the load of abject calamity. What are you looking at down there? I knew, of course, or imagined I did. We'd all seen it on CNN, then seen it, and seen it, and seen it, and seen it, till we'd almost become not to care. Nagasaki by the sea, with the Giants and Steelers game just a channel click away. Oh, Arnie said, you might get a kick out of it. Where is it you live now? Haddam, I said. Sally had come to the door from the kitchen in her yoga clothes, holding a tea mug to her lips, idly blowing steam away, looking at me as if she'd heard something alarming and felt I should possibly hang up. A loud truck horn blare pierced the silence where Arnie was in Cheesequake. Asshole, Arnie snarled. I probably wouldn't, I said, referring to the kick I might find available to me in hurricane destruction and endless human suffering beyond the ken of most suffering we know. Haddam, yep, nice place, or was, Arnie said. Frank, my house, your house, is about 100 yards inland now, pretty much on its side, if it had a side. The neighbors are all worse off. The Fazels rode it out, and they're goners now. The Bergstroms tried to make a run for it at the last minute. They ended up in the bay. Barb and I were in New Hampshire at my son's. We watched it on TV. I saw my house on TV before I saw it in person. I guess that could be good news, I said. Arnie didn't respond to this particular optimism. What do you want me to do, Arnie? I asked, watching the meter man motor slowly away. I'm going down today and meet the cocksuckers. Flip companies, speculators. You heard of them? Arnie had started speaking in a tough guy, South Jersey gangster growl. I know about them, I said. Okay, so you see the deal. I do see it, I said. Not good, I knew. I need some advice, Frank. You're honest. At least you used to be. I've been out of the business 6 years, Arnie. My license expired. All I know is what I read in the newspapers. Fine, Arnie said. It'll make you more reliable. Take away the profit incentive. You should see this place. I could say you owe me, but I won't. I'm not planning to kill you if you're worried about that. I hadn't quite gotten to there, Arnie, I said, though in truth I had. It had already happened twice, once in Ortley Beach and once in Seagirt, listing agents shot in their office. So, will you show up? Another truck's withering horn went blasting past. Jesus, these fucks, Arnie said. I'm going to get killed out here. So, I'll come, I said, if only Arnie would get off the shoulder and safely on to the scene of destruction. 10 o'clock at the house, Arnie said, or where the house used to be. You might recognize it. I'm driving a silver Lexus. It's a deal, I said. Some deal, Arnie said. We're going to have a hockey season this year, Frank. He's on to the NFL, the great leveler. I haven't been keeping up, Arnie, I said. The shit-for-brains players, Arnie said, staring at his Lexus. They got the best deal they'll ever get. Now they'd have to settle for less. Sound familiar? Arnie, as always, is on the side of management. Hail to the victors, Frank, he said. Champions of the West, Arnie. Mañana en la mañana. And that seemed to be how Arnie said thanks. Later that morning, Sally came downstairs again to where I was eating all bran, silently musing through the window into the backyard at a fugitive late autumn squirrel activity, pleased, in fact, to be thinking nothing worth recording, not Arnie Urquhart, just breathing to the cadence of my chews. She sat down across from me, holding a book I'd known her to be reading late into the night because her light had stayed on after I'd gone to sleep, then was switched off, then on again later. It's not unusual for people our age. I sleep better than she does. I read The Shocking Thing last night, she said. She held the book she'd been engrossed by, clutched through her nightdress. Her eyes were intent. She seemed worried. I couldn't make out the book's spine, but understood she meant to tell me about it. Tell me, I said. Well, she said, back in 1862, right when the Civil War was in full swing, our cavalry had time to put down an Indian revolt in Minnesota. Did you know that? Yes, I said. The Dakota Uprising. It's pretty famous. Okay, you know about that. I didn't, she said. I know some things, I said, and looked down at the banana slice in my cereal. All right, so in December of 1862, the cavalry hanged 38 Sioux warriors in one big square scaffold. Just did it all at once. That's famous too, I said. Supposedly, they massacred 800 white people. Not that that's an excuse. But, Sally said, she took a breath and turned her head away in a manner to indicate a tear she didn't want seen, that it might be wobbling out of her eyes. Did you know what they said? These words nearly choked with throat-clogging emotion. What who said? I asked. The Indians. They all began shouting as they were standing on the gallows, waiting to drop, to never speak again. I didn't know, but I looked up at her to let her understand I realized it was important to her and that the next thing she would say would be important to me. Possibly my spoon had paused on its upward trip to my mouth. I may have shaken my head in amazement. They all shouted, "I'm here." They all started calling that out in the Sioux language. All around that awful contraption that was about to kill them in less than a minute, people who heard it said it was awe-inspiring, not awesome. No one will ever forget it, and then they hanged them, all of them. I'm here, as if that made it all right for them, made death tolerable or something less awful. It gave them strength. Sally shook her head. The tear of anguish for long ago 1862 did not emerge from her eye. She held her book and smiled at me mournfully across the glass-topped table where I have eaten possibly 3,000 breakfasts in my life. I just thought you'd want to know about that. I'm sorry to ruin your breakfast, she said. I'm glad to know about it, sweetheart, I said. It didn't ruin my breakfast, and in many ways I was glad, and it didn't. I'm here, she said, and seemed suddenly embarrassed at herself. So am I said. And with these words, she got up, came around the square table, kissed me once on my temple, still somewhat embarrassed, then went away, carrying her book back to where she'd come from, in the house. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Richard Ford made the very good suggestion that we skip long, praiseful introductions tonight. And I mean, we should all be grateful. You and we are grateful. I'm James Salter. I'm a writer. Every writer feels honored, to come to the Y. I'm going to read some pages now from a novel called All That Is, published just this month by Knopf. Thank you. I'm asked frequently, what does that mean, all that is? Or not even asked, somebody says, what's the name of your book? I say, All That Is. Oh. What does it mean? Well, I think it means, in one sense, everything in the world, all. And in another sense, it means all there is in a life. The life in this case is the life of Philip Bowman, who was a young naval officer in the Pacific during the last stages of the war, and who goes on to have a life as an editor in New York in days in the last half of the last century. He's just graduated from college. He went back to college. He got his degree, and now he has decided on a life, a career in journalism. But in the mood of euphoria that was everywhere after the war, it was still necessary to find a place for oneself. He applied at the Times, but there was nothing, and it was the same at the other papers. Fortunately, he had a contact, a classmate's father who was in public relations and who had virtually invented the business. He could arrange anything in newspapers and magazines. For $10,000, it was said, he could put you on the cover of Time. He could pick up the phone and call anyone. The secretaries immediately put him through. Bowman was to go and see him at his house in the morning. He always ate breakfast at 9. Will he expect me? Yes, he knows you're coming. At 8:30, having hardly slept the night before, Bowman stood on the street in front of the house. It was a mild autumn morning. The house was in the 60s, just off Central Park West. It was broad and imposing, with tall windows, and the facade almost completely covered with a gown of ivy. At 8:45, he rang at the door, which was glass with heavy iron grillwork. He was shown into a sun-filled room on the garden. Along one wall was a long English-style buffet with 2 silver trays, a crystal pitcher of orange juice, and a large silver coffee pot covered with a cloth. Also butter, rolls, and jam. The butler asked how he'd like his eggs. Bowman declined the eggs. He had a cup of coffee and nervously waited. He knew what Mr. Kindrigan would look like, a well-tailored man with a somewhat sinewy face and gray hair. It was silent. There were occasional soft voices in the kitchen. He drank the coffee and went to get another cup. The garden windows were vanishing in the light. At 9:15, Kindrigan came into the room. Bowman said, "Good morning." Kindrigan did not reply or even appear to notice him. He was in shirt sleeves, an expensive shirt with wide French cuffs. The butler brought coffee and a plate with some toast. Kendrigan stirred the coffee, opened the newspaper, and began reading it, sitting sideways to the table. Bowman had seen villains in westerns sit this way. He said nothing and waited. Finally, Kendrigan said, "You are?" "Philip Bowman," Bowman said. "Kevin may have mentioned me." "Are you a friend of Kevin's?" "Yes, from school." Kendrigan still had not looked up. "You're from New Jersey. I live in Summit." "What is it you want?" Kendrigan said. "I'd like to work for the New York Times," Bowman said, matching the directness. Kendrigan glanced at him for a brief moment. "Go home," he said. He found a job with a small company that published a theater magazine and began by selling advertising. It was not difficult, but it was dull. The world of the theater was thriving. There were scores of theaters in the West 40s, one after another, and crowds strolled along deciding which to buy tickets to. Before long, he heard of another job, reading manuscripts at a publishing house. The salary, it turned out, was less than he'd been making, but publishing was a different kind of business. It was a gentleman's occupation. The origin of the silence and elegance of bookstores and the freshness of new pages, although this was not evident from the offices, which were off Fifth Avenue in the rear of an upper floor. It was an old building with an elevator that ascended slowly past open grillwork and hallways of worn white tile, uneven from the years. In the publisher's office, they were drinking champagne. One of the editors had just had a son. Robert Baum, the publisher, who owned the company with a financing partner, was in shirt sleeves, a man of about 30, of medium height, with friendly face, a face that was alert and somewhat homely, with the beginnings of pouches beneath the eyes. He talked amiably with Bowman for a couple of minutes, and having learned enough, hired him on the spot. "Salary's modest," he explained. "You're not married?" "No." What is the salary?" $160, Baum said. $160 a month. What do you think? "Well, less than needed, more than expected," Bowman replied. "More than expected? I made a mistake." Baum had confidence and charm, neither of them false. Publishing salaries were traditionally low, and the salary he offered was only slightly below that. It was necessary to keep overhead low in a business that was uncertain in itself, as well as being in competition with larger, well-established houses. They were a literary house, Baum liked to say, but only through necessity. They were not going to turn down a bestseller as a matter of principle. The idea, he said, was to pay little and sell a truck full. On the wall of his office was a framed letter from a colleague and friend, an older editor who'd been asked to read a manuscript. The letter was on a sheet of paper that had 2 fold marks and was very to the point. "This is a very obvious book with shallow characters described in a style that grates on one's nerves. The love affair is tawdry and of little interest, and in fact, one is repelled by it. Nothing but the completely obscene is left to the imagination. It is utterly worthless." It sold 200,000 copies, Baum said, and they're making a movie of it. "The biggest book we've ever had. I keep it there as a reminder." He did not add that he himself disliked the book and had only been persuaded to publish it by his wife, who said it would touch something in people. St. Patrick's Day was sunny and unusually mild. Men were in shirt sleeves, and from the appearance of things, work was ending at noon. The bars were full. Coming into one of them from out of the sunlight, Bowman, his eyes blinded, could barely make out the faces along the bar, but found a place to stand near the back where they were all shouting and calling to one another. The bartender brought his drink, and he took it and looked around. There were men and women drinking, young women mostly, two of them. He never forgot this moment, standing near him to his right, one dark-haired with dark brows, and when he could see her better, a faint down along her jawbone. The other was blonde, with a bare, shining forehead and wide-set eyes, instantly compelling, even in some way coarse. He was so struck by her face that it was difficult to look at her. She stood out so. On the other hand, he couldn't keep himself from doing it. He was almost fearful of looking. He raised his glass towards them. "Happy St. Patrick's," he managed to say. "Can't hear you," one of them cried. He tried to introduce himself. The place was too noisy. It was like a raging party they were in the middle of. "What's your name?" he called. "Vivian," the blonde girl said. He stepped closer. Louise was the dark-haired one. She already had a secondary role, but Bowman, trying not to be too direct, included her. "Do you live around here?" he said. Louise answered. She lived on 53rd Street. Vivian lived in Virginia. "Virginia," Bowman said, stupidly, he felt, as if it were China. "I live in Washington," Vivian said. He could not keep his eyes from her. Her face was as if somehow it was not completely finished, with smoldering features, a mouth not eager to smile, but a riveting face that God had stamped with the simple answer to life. When they asked what he did, the noise had quieted a little. He replied he was an editor. "An editor?" "Yes." "Of what? Magazines?" "Books," he said. "I work at Braden and Baum." They'd never heard of it. I was thinking of going to Clark's," he said, "but there was all this noise in here, and I just came in to see what was going on. I have to go back to work. What are you doing later?" They were going to a movie. "Want to come?" Louise said. He suddenly liked, even loved her. "I can't. Can I meet you later?" "I'll meet you back here." "What time?" "After work, any time." They agreed to meet at 6. All afternoon he was almost giddy and found it hard to keep his mind on things. Time moved with a terrible slowness, but at 5:45, walking quickly, almost running, he went back. He was a few minutes early. They were not there. He waited impatiently until 6:15, then 6:30. They never appeared. With a sickening feeling, he realized what he had done. He had let them go without asking for a telephone number or address. 53rd Street was all he knew, and he would never see them, her, again. Hating his ineptness, he stayed for nearly an hour, toward the end striking up a conversation with the man next to him so that if by chance they did finally come, he would not seem foolish and dog-like standing there. What was it, he wondered, that had betrayed him and made them decide not to come back? Had they been approached by someone else after he left? He was miserable. He felt the terrible emptiness of men who are ruined, who see everything collapse in a single day. He went to work in the morning still feeling anguish. He could not talk about it to Edens. It was in him like a deep splinter, together with a sense of failure. He sat quietly reading when Gretchen came over. "Someone on the phone for you." Bowman picked up his phone and said somewhat curtly, "Hello?" It was her. He felt a moment of insane happiness. She was apologizing. They had come back at 6 the night before, but hadn't been able to find the bar. They couldn't remember the street. "Yes, of course," Bowman said. "I'm so sorry, but that's all right. We even went to Clark's," she said. "I remembered you said that. I'm so glad you called. I just wanted you to know that we tried to come back and meet you." No, that's all right. That's fine. Look, give me your address, will you?" "In Washington?" "Yes, anywhere." She gave it, and Louise's as well. She was going back to Washington that afternoon, she said. What time is the train? Do you have time for lunch?" "Not really. The train was at 1. That's too bad." "Well, maybe another time," he said foolishly. "Well, bye," she said after a pause. "Goodbye," he somehow agreed. But he had her address. He looked at it after hanging up. It was precious beyond words. He didn't know her last name. In the great vault of Penn Station, with the light and wide blocks coming down through the glass and onto the crowd that was always waiting, Bowman made his way. He was nervous, but then caught sight of her standing unaware. "Vivian!" She looked around and then saw him. "Oh, it's you. What are you doing here?" "I wanted to say goodbye," he said, and added, I brought you a book I thought you might like." Vivian had had books as a child, she and her sister, children's books. They had even fought over them. She had read Nancy Drew and some others, but to be honest, she said, she didn't read that much. Forever Amber. Her skin was luminous. "Well, thank you. It's one of ours," he said. She read the title. It was very sweet of him. It was not something she would ever expect, or that boys she knew would do, or even grown-ups. She was 20 years old, but not yet ready to think of herself as a woman, probably because she was still largely supported by her father and because of her devotion to him. She'd gone to junior college and gotten a job. The women she knew were known for their style, their writing ability, and their husbands, also their nerve. She had an aunt who had been robbed in her home at gunpoint by 2 black men and had said to them coolly, "We've been too good to you people." Bowman wrote to her, and almost to his disbelief, she wrote back. Her letters were friendly and open. She came to New York several times that spring and early summer, staying with Louise and even sharing the bed with her, laughing in pajamas. She had not yet told her father about her boyfriend. The one she had in Washington worked at State or in the trust department at Riggs and were in many ways replicas of their parents. She did not think of herself as a replica. She was daring, in fact, taking the train up to see a man she had met in a bar whose background she did not know, but who seemed to have depth and originality. They went to Luchau's, where the waiter said, "Guten Abend," and Bowman talked to him for a moment in German. "I didn't know you spoke German." "Well, until recently, it wasn't a great thing to do," Bowman said. He had taken German at Harvard, he explained, because it was the language of science. At the time, I thought I wanted to be a scientist. I went back and forth between a number of things. I thought for a while I might teach. I still have a certain yearning for teaching. Then I decided to be a journalist, but I wasn't able to get a job as one. I heard about a job as a reader then. It was pure luck, or maybe destiny. What do you think of the idea of destiny? Hadn't thought about it, she said casually. He liked talking to her and the occasional smile that made her forehead shine. She was wearing a sleeveless dress, and the roundness of her small shoulders gleamed. Her little finger was curled and held apart as she ate a bite of bread. Gestures, facial expressions, way of dressing, these were the revealing things. He was imagining places where they might go together, where no one knew them, and he would have her to himself for days on end, though he was uncertain of how it might happen. New York's a wonderful place, isn't it, he said. Yes, I like coming here. How do you know Louise? Well, we were in boarding school in the same class. The first thing she ever said to me was a dirty joke. Well, not exactly dirty, but you know. He told her about the time the first letters, E-S, on the big sign above the Essex house had gone out, and there it was, 40 stories up, shining in the night. He went no further. He didn't want to seem coarse. At the end of the evening, at the front door, he was prepared to say goodnight, but she acted as if he were not there, unlocking the door and saying nothing. Louise was gone for the weekend to visit her parents. Vivian was nervous, though she did not want to show it. He went upstairs with her. Would you like a cup of coffee, she asked. Yes, that would be... No, he said, not really. They sat for a few moments in silence, and then she simply leaned forward and kissed him. The kiss was light but ardent. Do you want to, she asked. She did not take everything off. Shoes, stockings, and skirt, that was all. She was not prepared for more. They kissed and whispered. As she slid from her white panties, a white that seemed sacred, he barely breathed. The fineness of her, the blondish fleece. He could not believe they were doing this. I don't have anything, he whispered. There was no answer. He was inexperienced, but it was natural and overwhelming, also too quick. He couldn't help it. He felt embarrassed. Her face was close to his. I'm sorry, he said. I couldn't stop it. She said nothing. She had almost no way to judge. She went into the bathroom, and Bowman lay back in awe at what had happened and feeling intoxicated by a world that had suddenly opened wide to the greatest pleasure, pleasure beyond knowing. He knew of the joy that might lie ahead. Vivian was thinking along less heady lines. There was the chance of her becoming PG, though she had, in truth, only an inexact idea of how likely that was. At school, there'd been a lot of talk, but it was only talk and vague. Still, there were stories of girls who got away the first time. It would be just her luck, she thought. Of course, it hadn't been entirely the first time. You make me think of a pony, he said lovingly. A pony? Why? Well, you're just beautiful and free. I don't see how that's like a pony, she said. Besides, ponies bite. Mine did. She nestled against him, and he tried to think along her lines. Whatever might happen, they had done it. He felt only exultation. In Summit, where he wanted his mother to meet Vivian, to see and approve of her, he took her first to a diner across from City Hall that had been there for years. It had actually been a railroad car with windows all along one side facing the avenue. Inside, the floor was tile and the ceiling pale wood that curved down into the wall. A counter where customers sat, there were always one or two, ran the length of the place. It was more crowded in the morning. The railroad station, the Morrison Essex line that went to the city, was just down the street. The tracks were low and out of sight. At night, the lights of the diner were the only lights along the street. You entered by a door opposite the counter, and there was another door at one end. It was here that Hemingway placed his story, The Killers, Bowman said. Right here in this diner, the counter, everything. Do you know the story? It's marvelous, fabulously written. If you never read another word of his, you know right away what a great writer he is. It's in the evening. Nobody's in the place. There are no customers. It's empty. And two men in tight black overcoats come in and sit down at the counter. They look at the menu and order. And one of them says to the counterman, "This is some town. What's the name of this place?" And the counterman, who's frightened, of course, says, "Summit." It's right there in the story, Summit. And when the food comes, they eat with their gloves on. They're there to kill a Swede, they tell the counterman. They know the Swede always comes there. He's an ex-fighter named Ole Anderson who double-crossed the mob somehow. One of them takes a sawed-off shotgun from beneath his coat and goes into the kitchen to hide and wait. Did this actually happen? No. He wrote it in Spain. It's just made up. No, you don't believe it's made up reading it. That's what's so incredible. You absolutely believe it. And they kill him. It's better than that. They don't kill him because he doesn't show up. But he knows they're after him. They'll come again. He's big. He was a boxer. But whatever he did, they're going to kill him. So he just lies in bed in the rooming house, looking at the wall. "I'd like to meet Hemingway," he said. "Go down to Cuba and meet him. Maybe we could go together." "Well, I don't know," she said. "Maybe." "You have to read him," he said. Beatrice, Bowman's mother, had been eager to meet her and was also struck by her looks, though in a different way, the freshness and naked animal statement. How much one knows from the first. She had bought flowers and set the table in the dining room where they seldom ate, usually using the table in the kitchen, one end of which was against the wall. The kitchen, with shelves but no cabinets, was the real heart of the house, together with the sitting room, where they often sat in front of the fire talking and having a drink. Now there was this girl with somewhat stiff manners. She was from Virginia, and Beatrice asked, "What part? Middleburg?" "Well, we really live near to Upperville," Vivian replied. Upperville. It sounded rural and small. It was, in fact, small. There was one place to eat, but no town water or sewage. Nothing had changed there for 100 years. And people there liked it that way, whether they lived in an old house without heat or on 1,000 acres. Upperville. in the county and beyond, was an exalted name, the emblem of a proud parochial class of which Vivian was a member. There was no place to stay there. You had to live there. It's beautiful country, Bowman said. Beatrice said, I'd love to see it. What does your family do there? Farm, Vivian said. Well, my father farms some, but he also puts his field up for grazing. It must be big. Well, it's not terribly big. It's about 400 acres. That's so interesting. Apart from farming, what is there to do? Well, Daddy always says there's lots to do. He means looking after the horses. Horses, yes. It was not that she was difficult to talk to, but you immediately felt the limits. Vivian had gone to junior college, probably at the suggestion of her father to keep her out of mischief. She had a certain confidence based on the things she absolutely knew and which had proved to be enough. Like all mothers, though, Beatrice hoped for a girl like herself, with whom she could speak easily, and his view of life could almost perfectly be combined with her own. Among her pupils over the years, she could think of girls who were like that, good students with natural charm that you admired and were drawn to. But there were also others not so easily understood and whose fate you were not meant to know. Didn't Liz Bohannon come from Middleburg? Beatrice asked, bringing up a name, a horse and society figure in the 30s, always photographed with her husband aboard some ship sailing to Europe or in their box at Saratoga. Yes, she has a big place. She's a friend of my father's. She's still around. Oh, very much around. There are a lot of stories about her, Vivian said. When they first bought their place, Longtree, that was the name then, she used to ride in from the hunt and let the dogs come right into the house. They'd jump up on the table and eat everything. After she got divorced, she calmed down a bit. Oh, you must know her then. Oh, yes. Vivian was eating somewhat carefully, not like a girl with a genuine appetite. The flowers, which Beatrice had moved to the side, were a lush backdrop for her, some young pagan goddess who had cast a spell over her son. Though it wasn't entirely a spell, Beatrice had no way to measure how much in need of love he was and what forms that took. Meanwhile, he was absolutely certain of one thing, that he would never meet someone like Vivian again. He saw himself tumbled with her among the bedclothes and fragrance of married life, the meals and holidays of it, the shared rooms, the glimpses of her half-dress, her blondness, the pale hair where her legs met, the sexual riches that would be there forever. When he told his mother he hoped to marry her, Beatrice, though afraid it would prove nothing, protested how unalike the two of them were, how little they had in common. They had a great deal in common, Bowman a little defiantly said. What they had in common was more vital than similar interests. It was wordless understanding and accord. What Beatrice did not say, but what she deeply felt, was that Vivian had no soul. But to say it would be unforgivable. She merely sat silent. After a moment, she said, I hope you won't rush into anything. In her heart, she feared she knew the things you cannot see when you... In her heart, she feared. She knew the things you cannot see when you are too young. She hoped that with a little time, the infatuation would pass. She could only press his head against her in love and understanding. I only want you to be happy, truly happy. I would be truly happy. I mean in your deepest heart. Yes, in my deepest. It was love, the furnace into which everything is dropped. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Take a seat.
Yeah.
I'm this one.
No, that's fine. Well, I guess the whole business of the writer's writer is over now, isn't it?
God, I hope so.
Yeah, I know. You got a book on the bestseller list. You got some big prize from Yale. Jesus Christ, it'll be a movie next.
No, but it's hard to make them forget, however.
You know what it means to be a writer's writer? It means you don't have enough money.
I do now.
I know you do. So I'm going to try to start off by trying to make virtue out of age. I mean, there's some value to having done some stuff in life. There's some value to actually knowing something from experience. And so, you know, I wrote you last fall when I read actually what you just read from the Paris Review. And I said to you that the thing I liked about that passage and the thing that I liked about the whole book, and it a little bit responds to what you just said, was that you got yourself fully expressed in that book. That's what it seemed to me when I was reading it, that you got fully expressed. And you said that that was good because that was what you had really wanted to do. What did you mean by that?
Fully expressed?
Yeah, well, that's what I said, but you agreed.
You mean my agreement?
Yes.
What did my agreement
What did
mean?
your agreement signify?
Well, I was afraid to disagree with you. It sounded very flattering. Well, I meant that, as you said, age has something to do with it, and you get an opportunity to write a book, or you start to write a book, and you realize you're truly embarked, you're doing it. You spend some time, some years doing it, and you realize that you're getting a chance, that you're getting the chance to show yourself in your completely mature way. That makes it sound like some psychology class.
No, it just sounds true.
You cannot tell. The book never. I'm assuming this is true. Maybe for you. I don't want to make too big an assumption. The book is not what I hoped it would be. You never are quite able to write the book that you dream it to be. It simply cannot be grasped, but it's close to it. And in being close to it, it has a lot of my imprint on it. And you reach a point where you say, I can't do any better with this book. And there it is, and anybody will know who's ever read anything of mine, or even if you haven't, sort of knows me from it.
I always think that when I write a book that it didn't quite come out the way I wanted it to, that I always wish the book was shorter. that my idea of I think the great American novel is the Great American Short Novel. and I can give you some examples.
Go ahead.
You've written a couple of them, as a matter of fact. So, but I mean, So Long, See You Tomorrow, for instance,
Yes.
is a great one. I mean, The Great Gatsby is a great one, just to think of two right off the bat. So when I think about the discrepancy between accomplishment and what your goal might have been, it was always that whatever it took me to say what I wanted to, but this is all a misnomer. You don't say stuff, you just make stuff up and put it in the place where there was before nothing. But when I do that, it always takes me a little longer than I wish it took me.
Well, I mean, you have an incredible richness. Richness is not the word. You have an incredible wealth of vocabulary in your writing. It's unbelievably rich with it. And it must come, when I say naturally, I don't mean you just write down these things, but it's your inclination to be generous in your work. So I can see, but I don't have that problem. I am definitely miserly in trying to write enough and trying to get what I need. I can't. I don't have an abundance of it. I'm trying to write longer. If you were trying to write shorter.
Well, that's so much at odds with your sentences, though, because when I read your sentences, what I think is that you never relent on a sentence. You use every part of speech. You use every clause possible to you. You push out every description to its consequence. Your ability to choose words is very good. And I won't say
very good.
Good, yes.
That's quite a compliment.
And so if you think that you're always, maybe that's the explanation for it. You're always trying to do a little more, which is when I teach people, that's what I try to get them to do. Don't cheap up on me. Give me your best shot.
Everything you've got. Well, I would say you're better than I am.
Oh, you're the only person in this room that would say that.
Well, let's stop bowing. But I mean,
that's all right.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, let's do it. I'll say something else to you. You know, there's a line of Walter Benjamin's in his essay, The Storyteller, in which he says that the novel takes the incommensurate to extremes in the representation of human life. And does writing a novel feel that way to you, that you are actually taking things to extremes?
No, taking things to extremes. No, I wouldn't describe it that way. I would say it's trying to find a way to do this, trying to find a way to describe what you have in your mind, perhaps not perfectly clearly. When he says the incommensurate, he's trying, please read the...
He says the novel takes the incommensurate to extremes in representing life, which means that life is itself incommensurate. Nothing can be made that's commensurate with it.
In a way, that's what I was attempting to say, that you cannot, in the end, you did not do it. There was so much, maybe not in the actual text that you left out, but so much that you almost had an opportunity to say in the book, but either the plot or the meagerness of your imagination or the figures in it, you never had an opportunity to quite do all that. I mean, you don't start out and saying, I'm going to define the world. Well, I just said the title was that, but I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that seriously. But you don't start out that way. You start out with a definite story and people and a period and a place and events and all that in mind. But surrounding them is everything else you know and everything else that might be, that might be happening at the same time. You can't use all that. There's no possibility of putting that in there. It would choke the thing to death, and it's not serving your purpose. So you have to choose among that and make a certain length. You say you like them short. I'm always trying to write them a bit longer.
Yeah. Sometimes I think that the shape of novels that I write are actually defined by trying to get everything I know in, and that when I can get everything I know in and there isn't anything left that I thought I wanted to put in, then that's the shape. And that's the big bulbous thing that becomes its shape. Yeah.
Of course, that's not the case with Canada.
No, because I had to. No, it's not, because it wasn't very close to my life, Canada. So a great bit of it actually had to come from memory and had to come from places other than my life.
But it's a little bit different. Has no philosophical richness in it that you find in the other books.
Right.
It is what it is.
Right.
Pretty straight. It's unmistakably written by you, but it's a bit different than the others.
Well, everybody's got a lot of different voices running around in his or her head. This whole notion, it's a huge misnomer about voice. That I remember when when Ray Carver was alive, people were always saying, Ray Carver has a voice, and this is the voice of a Ray Carver story. And I always thought, well, Christ Ray has a lot of voices, and those voices get expressed in differing sentence lengths and differing compound complex sentences and differing word choices. And so I just think that, it's not ventriloquism by any means, but we all do when we turn. In fact, I just noticed Pico Iyer actually stole something from me in an essay he wrote in the New York Times a week or so ago, but basically it's the same thing. He says we all, in every mode of address, I address you, or I address my doctor, or I address my priest, or I address someone dear to me, address Christina, then that chooses a different set of words, and it chooses a different set of sentence lengths, and that's kind of how novels work, different modes of address. I mean, I don't think I could necessarily tell something that you wrote. Maybe I could, because I've read it all.
No, but I don't agree with you. I think when I'm reading Frank Bascom addressing people, he has a certain sentence length.
Yeah.
He has a certain really rich vocabulary, not always in his address, but in the remarks subsequent to the address or surrounding it. And the people that he encounters are often people that he can talk to.
Right.
And of course, you really can't talk to anybody you can't talk to.
Right.
I mean, in life you can't. So, no, I think your voice is partly that aspect of it. That is to say, Bascom and the people he can talk to and how he talks to them. Now, I don't know whether to call that voice, style, or this principal figure, but it's identifiable.
He is, I think, even to me, when I go back to writing him again, it's because I can make those sentences that persuade me that it's his speaking voice in any way. But there are lots of other voices that we speak in. At least I do.
But as I say, you can he can speak to them, and you make it so.
Yeah.
you make it possible. When he's talking to Vicky, who doesn't speak anything like him, she speaks some kind of fabulous Southern
Texas.
poetry or whatever it is. But he can talk to her. Well, you fixed that up.
Yeah, I did that. Yeah. All right, we've beaten this horse to death now. But I have another horse to beat to death. You know, last week when Sarah Plimpton gave you that manuscript, which George, I guess, had
Yes.
for decades, and you were leaving with it, and I looked at it and sort of thumbed through it a moment, and I said to you, I said, does this have George's editing marks in it? And you said, George's editing marks? No, you said. George didn't put any editing marks in this. I just wrote it and sent it to him, and he published it exactly the way it was. Sort of indignant about that. And I've been thinking about that ever since. Is that the way editing actually happens with you? You just send it in, it's finished, and they just sort of put it in the pipeline?
Well, I say take it or leave it.
You know, so,
No, come on.
no, I'm just listening.
No, I want to tell them what you're referring to.
Oh, please.
Yeah. A Sport and a Pastime, I had written and submitted, not to George first, but to my previous publisher, and then to another publisher. They turned it down, and through a friend, it was sent to George in that very type pages. And I've told this before. He called up and he said, the book is wonderful. He had kind of, he had that
Transatlantic
special
accent.
way of talking. He said, the book is wonderful. It's just that I love it. I like to publish it, but no good book is written in the first person, he said. No really good book. And I couldn't think of an answer to that, of course. I couldn't think of a good book. The only thing I could think of was All Quiet on the Western Front, which was an early book I had read, and I knew the first line of. I said, what about that? He said, you're right. And that was all the editing that was done, actually.
So,
Well, that's an exception. I mean, obviously.
it hasn't been forever thus.
No, certainly not.
Yeah.
And it was not on this book. Robin Desser, who's here, was my editor. The book wouldn't exist as it is without her. And I've reached a stage where my pride has been humbled to a point where it's not difficult for me to say that.
I know, and we both do know our colleagues, some of who suffer no editing whatsoever. They send their books in, and if anybody puts a squiggle on a page, well, then they're outraged. I always think that their books generally could be made better if somebody would put more than a squiggle on a page. I mean, I've always thought that a responsible and alert set of eyes to something that I wrote might, in fact, tell me something that I didn't know.
Well, there's no question about that. I mean, from a quasi-technical point of view, they'll pick up things that you didn't realize, or in my case, I don't realize I'm using the same color repeatedly, or whatever the fault is. But then, of course, you have editors, rather wonderful editors like Christopher McElhose, who simply cannot abide an adverb and will strike out all the adverbs on a page.
In The Sports Writer, he went through, this is an English editor who has edited Jim and me both, and doesn't now, we regret to say, but he went through all of The Sports Writer, which is 300 and something pages, and circled every ly adverb in the entire book.
Every adverb.
Every ly adverb.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is, he's right. For me, he is, because so many adverbs for me get into sentences for rhythmical sake, not for substantive sake, and they are a weak sister in the sentence. I mean, they come along generally after the verb, and they try to do things to the verb after the verb has done whatever it's going to do, And then you keep just kind of waving its hand like that, you know. So I've learned a lot from that.
The problem was, he did your manuscript first and then came to mine.
This is a very wonderful man. He's about 9 feet tall, a Scot, speaks with a very deep voice like this. Quite a wonderful guy, a great friend of both of ours. In Burning the Days, you wrote, and I'm going to quote something that you wrote. You said, "It is only in books that one finds perfection, only in books that it cannot be spoiled. Art, in a sense, is life brought to a standstill, rescued from time." That could be taken as bespeaking a dim view of lived life. If you,
A dim view
of lived life, that only art finds perfection.
Well, it is only in books that read the.
It is only in books that one finds perfection, only in
the-
books that it cannot be spoiled.
That's it. I mean, that's it. Oh, you mean when life's experience, your experience cannot be spoiled. Something perfect,
Yes. That life can't be
but it can be forgotten.
Ah,
It can be perhaps tainted somewhat.
yeah.
It can perhaps a little diminished by weakened memory. And after all these experiences did not happen except in your memory, even in another person's memory, it's not the same experience. So I think you have to be lenient
I'm
with
lenient.
this sentence.
I'm lenient with that sentence. I thought about it though. It's a kind of, as a writer, for you, it's a kind of perfectionist's view. And I sometimes read sentences of yours which seem to me well nigh perfect. And I just think to myself, gee.
Well, I can say the same for you.
well,
I
you
mean,
could, but I would mean it. You could say that. Yes, you could say that. You could
all
say
right.
anything.
All right, you did it. Okay.
All right, I've turned that loose. All right, I have another something. Excuse me. When I was reading through the winter books of yours that I hadn't read before, there were only a couple. I hadn't read The Hunters before.
Yes.
And I did read The Hunters, which was published in 1956. I guess you were still flying airplanes when you wrote The Hunters. It's quite a nice novel about air war and a lot of other things too. And then 11 years go by, and you published A Sport and a Pastime, and that's a different book. It's a different book stylistically. It's a different book in its attitude toward its sentences. And I wonder if you ever think about what changed in your thinking about books when you were between the time that you wrote your first published book,
Yes.
and the time you wrote your second published book. Did something change?
Well, I think a certain amount of failure and reading, and it's hard to know. I don't know if this was has been your experience. At a certain point, I felt I knew what I was doing in a different way. And
Did you feel like you were bumping your game up?
well, I mean, that's fair. That's a fair expression, but I don't. That's not mine. I would just say that I felt I could do it. It's as if I had suddenly the ink was flowing, and the pages seemed to turn out, and all the other. I mean, the other is a book. The Hunters is a book, but it seems to me. I remember when I wrote it, and it seems to me inexpert. And the books later seem to be written by a more authoritative hand. I don't, that may not be obvious. It's often said that the pages that were most difficult to write are the easiest to read. And it may be that way with these books, that you think of them as being difficult and not really working well, but to the reader, they seem perfectly okay. I wouldn't go further than okay.
But I think that's right. I don't think that between sentences that I write with a great deal of facility, that seemed, as you said, with the ink flowing onto the page, because I write with a pen like you do, and the sentences that I slave over and bang away my brain over, that when it all gets finally put in print and I say I've done the best I can do, they all seem about equally accessible to me, which is a good argument for working hard, I suppose. All right, now we have some questions from
Okay,
some of
you
our...
first.
I get to read them, so
Well, read one for
I'm
yourself.
just going to read the first one I see.
All right.
What do you find yourself, and these are from the audience, what do you find yourself trying to convey more in your writing? The disappointments in life or the unexpected beauties in life? You want me to do that, don't you? Oh, you said...
You go ahead.
Oh, actually, neither. I'm trying to write sentences, and that's what I always think about when somebody says write. What write means to me is to actually make sentences on a page, which I then read. What I'm always trying to do, as much as I can, is to write a sentence which actually says something that nobody would have thought before, and that when they read it, will think, gee, that's true. I never thought of that before. I mean, there's a famous quote of F.R. Leavis's. He says, literature is the supreme means by which we renew our sensuous and emotional life and learn a new awareness. And there's almost not a sentence that I write that I wouldn't like to have be guilty of that. So the idea of expressing the disappointments in life or the unexpected beauties of life, those kind of fall under the rubric of doing those other things that for me are more important.
Well, I think you're doing both of them.
I
think you're writing both
lucky,
of them.
If you're lucky,
On a given page, I often find both of them.
Well,
I mean, a given page of yours.
yeah. Well, it's always to me, I sort of suppose I grew up not thinking I was very smart, so I'm always trying to be smart on the page. I mean, you grew up knowing you were smart, and you are smart. But you have to kind of find out by some means that you have a brain and that it'll work, and that you have an intelligence that is useful to others. Writing was the way I learned to do that, and before that, reading. All right, here's number 2. This is more for you. The World War II, I said to Jim yesterday, I said, our mothers were born in the same year, basically. I said, either I ought to be your age or you ought to be mine.
Yeah, right.
In the World War II section of All That Is, reads like a little novel in itself. Did you think about drawing it out some more? Did you think about drawing it out some more? The opening section, which is the...
Had I thought of
Did you think about making it?
Or would I thought?
Did you?
No, I didn't, as a matter of fact. It seemed to me there'd been so much written about the war, and that was really not what was important here. What was important is his particular experience, but to give us a sense of the intensity of the war and let it go at that. It was merely background. The book started after the war, in a way. We were talking about books being longer or shorter. Yes, I mean, it could be 2 more chapters about it, but I don't think that would enhance or make the book better.
Yeah, the real trick in writing substantial novels is to know what to subordinate to what, not to let everything.
That's a question of subordination.
Yeah.
Here, I felt.
Yeah. All right, one last question. This can be for both of us if you want to.
Okay.
Can you talk about your first trip to Paris?
Would you?
No, did you? Well, I guess it says can you. That's kind of
You mean
that's an ambiguous question.
in front of these,
In front of people, I
in
guess.
front of everybody? Well, it wasn't. It was unforgettable, but it was nothing much. Really. It was not that long after the war. Paris was a wreck, dirty, cold. It was in the winter. I went in December or February, I can't remember. But it was Paris. It was the city I'd heard about, read about, imagined, and going down the avenues, there it was for real somehow.
You wrote about it in Burning the Days
Yes.
quite wonderfully well.
Yeah.
You certainly
Thank you.
did. Yeah.
I
Mine was-
recommend the book to you, whoever wrote
I
that question.
I second that recommendation. My first trip to Paris was with Christopher McLehose and Ray Carver and Jonathan Rabin, and we just flew in one day from London, and I got off the plane, and it was as if I had been caught by surprise being in Paris, and I had been in London, and I'd never gone out of the country until I was 45 years old, except to Mexico, and which counts. I don't want to say it doesn't count, but I'd never been to Europe, and went to London, and then suddenly Christopher, this fellow we were talking about, took us all over to Paris to give a reading at the Village Voice. So for me, in 1986 with Ray, it was all entirely a literary experience. It was to go there with books and to do things with books in that wonderful bookstore, which is now sorrowfully gone.
Gone.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you.